This is a workshop.
All right, we're leading. Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming, everybody. I guess I don't have to like call to order a meeting, a workshop, do I? Just, hey, we're getting started. Okay.
Way more, this is a chance for conversation amongst elected officials and
Yeah.
staff, sir.
So this whole thing kind of got started with me experiencing development downtown and experiencing developers or people, locals trying to develop things in the MLK corridor, and even Sankova Group, the problems that they're bumping into, and kind of setting the context of the conversation. And Robbie's coming, but his dad was a huge part of changing the land development code downtown in like '08, '07. It was a long time ago, meaning reduction of parking for commercial projects, reduction or complete going away of stormwater, and that opened the door slightly for me. And without those things, I would have come down here. I had money and I had no idea how real estate works. And I would have been mad and frustrated and left bewildered and upset. And MLK has even more hurdles to get through that are not our fault. It's DOT's expansion. You have these tiny little lots. You have parking regulations, and you have stormwater requirements from DOT. And so we should. What I'd like to see is us finding a way to overcome some of these developments. Robbie touches on this great point, which is it costs the same amount of money to build a building no matter where you put it. Whether you put it on the beach, whether you put it in Millville, whether you put it downtown. And developers will put it where they can put it, build it where it's the fastest and it makes the most return. And they need comps. And that was the problem with every part of downtown, which is, and with every real estate product, you have to have a comp created by someone who's willing to take a crazy amount of risk to bet on something when there's no numbers to back up the bet. And I've been that person downtown, which is the most risky person to do things, is the person that creates the comp. And we are hoping someone does that further on MLK. And it's already hard enough to build something and get the rental rate. And you certainly have a harder time on MLK since there's not rental comps, especially not strong rental comps, and the barriers to entry of parking and stormwater. And so this workshop is an effort of aligning vision and goal. And I'm not an engineer nor a city planner. I do watch a lot of YouTube videos. And so some of this is an attempt at me going, hey, I've seen this here, I've seen that here, and us kind of aligning how hard things are to do and overcome, and an ongoing discussion of how, we move forward and give MLK, that corridor, the same or close to the same, or as close as we can get it, the same foundation that downtown had when I walked in the door, and it was still almost impossible and could have bankrupted me. And so that's what the discussion is. So I don't know where to lead it from here. I sent some notes in early today. I believe those are all printed out as well. I referenced the Dover Coal plans previously. I thought the draft stuff here was really awesome. I don't know if we do want to do a presentation or where we move from here.
Well, before we go, I'd just like to say thank you, Mayor, for calling this workshop. As the development on MLK is exciting, and there are a lot of interesting parties who want to develop on the street. But I think it's important that we send a message of what we want, and that development is wanted on the MLK corridor. And this workshop allows us to begin planning how to actually encourage that using the resources, particularly over the hurdles that have been identified, as the mayor has just outlined. So thank you for
Absolutely.
calling for this workshop.
We have current people. Judge Smiley's one of those folks who's trying to build a very similar development that Mr. Trumbull built on the 900 block of Harrison Avenue on the west side. It's like a little strip center. And he has to put in $120,000 of stormwater unless we come up with some sort of creative solution, which any new construction is hard enough getting. And he's awesome guy. He said, I can't make sense of this financially. And so we want to create a playing field that people can navigate through. So I was referencing, and some of my notes were referencing the Dover Coal Plan, which talks about a lot of these things. I have no knowledge of FDOT processes. I've sent a few emails, and so I don't know where you guys like to get started.
I think it might be helpful, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, to maybe turn it over to our Public Works team and kind of just give an update on some of what they've drafted and some of their experiences. I've expressed to you in our one-on-ones that, y'all often have contacts with higher up at DOT. I know Commissioner Street had this recently, and it's like, oh, yeah, you guys can do that. And then our staff calls the appropriate staff at DOT that handles that, and they're like, yeah, you can't do that. And so that kind of puts us in a very difficult position because our team strives to deliver every day for you all as the representatives of the businesses and men, women, and children of the city. But when we kind of run up against, challenges, especially along DOT corridors, because they require us to plan for the 100-year storm as opposed to city, which only requires for 25, it's a lot different. So we would love to see these developed, but it's tough, again, when you're working right up against FDOT, especially like with the Sankofa group where you've got 77 on one side and 90 on the other. You're really sandwiched in.
So I guess we could start too with, when does DOT not have to approve something? If we show that we're shooting water away from their road? Or walk us through the process, because I keep hearing the DOT, but when does DOT have nothing to do with it?
So DOT is involved anytime we run into DOT pipes or have to go across a DOT road, because all the crossings underneath are owned by DOT. So when they model those structures, they have a flow, and the way that their permits are mapped is that you cannot increase the flow at all going into those pipes. So not only do you have to do 100-year storms for FDOT, you have to do multi-day storms, 1, 2, and 3-day 100-year storms. So that's why you'll see a lot of ponds next to FDOT roads that are just exorbitantly large.
A good example of that is Truesdale Park right now.
Yes, so
You've
Truesdale Park.
Notice how big that?
We've had a lot of feedback of, you didn't need to actually do that pond. Well, we did, because it discharges to an FDOT right of way. So that is why we had to do that pond. If it was a city road, it would have been much smaller, could have probably just been more of like an aesthetic looking swale. But because it was FDOT, it had to be probably 3 to 4 times larger than it would have been if it was just city. Same thing with Mr. Smiley's property. Whenever we met with him in the pre-development conference, I told him, stormwater, I can tell you our rules right now, but our rules are going to mean nothing to FDOT rules. If you meet their rules, you will have far exceeded our rules. And so I really haven't even looked at his stormwater calculations, because it doesn't really matter what I think. And he, like you said, has a very expensive underground storm system, because that's what makes sense for the footprint of his property, but it is very expensive.
Yeah, so I guess, again, what do we have to show DOT where they don't have to approve anything?
If we can not have to cross an FDOT road or go into any FDOT storm structure, so even if it would maybe go into a city storm structure, but then go across an FDOT road, that still would need their approval.
Okay.
So in a lot of this MLK corridor, the water flows from west to east. So anything on the west side of MLK, unfortunately, is typically flowing across their road, unless we can find a way to reroute that to a pond or some other system on a city property and keep it on the west side before it then discharges, and then we can provide that attenuation that they're looking for. That's the main hurdle. Most stuff on the east side, grade-wise, we could probably shed it to our infrastructure, or again, I have a map at the very end of my document that I provided that shows all of the parcels in blue that are owned by the city. And one of the strategies that I outlined would be to take some of the smaller parcels that would be very difficult to develop. It'd be very hard to get a structure and parking on them, and maybe use them as some type of treatment system. Maybe we do some type of aesthetic rain garden. There's also a very large parcel, I think it's just north of 11th Street, that is currently, it has at least 3 giant stormwater pipes that run through it. It runs across the road, through that parcel runs through the alley, and then all three pipes run north. There's potential maybe to turn that parcel into a storm pond, have those pipes discharge into that parcel, create a pond, allow it to treat and attenuate there before then discharging, which would potentially maybe give us some capacity because those pipes would be relieved into a pond instead of all being conveyance. So that could be something we look at. There's a lot of strategies we could use. But something else I want to bring to your attention is the new ERP rules, which is something that Sankofa had brought up in their meeting.
The ones that came out in January.
December 28th of last
What
year.
does ERP mean, ma'am, for the public?
Environmental Resource Permit, it's by FDEP. The rules changed on December 28th, 2025. And used to, what you were looking at when you did an ERP permit was you had to provide a certain amount of treatment based on the amount of runoff that you were creating by adding a building or a parking lot impervious surface. You would have to provide a certain level of treatment to that, and then there was attenuation, pretty much said your pond had to recover to its pre-storm volume in a certain amount of time. Now, the way that they look at it is when you do a development, you have to make it better than it was treatment-wise, so your nitrogen and phosphorus loads that you have from this rain, which is something that we never calculated before, just letting you know. This is new to all of us, this nutrient load thing. So you have to calculate how much nitrogen and phosphorus you are shedding from your property before you do anything. And then your post-project, you have to find out how much nitrogen and phosphorus you are now shedding from your property by adding all this impervious surface. Your treatment of your pond has to be better than pre, and so you have to pick whichever one's more strict. 85% phosphorus and 55% nitrogen removal. So a lot of times there is actually a case of a project where we're actually returning the site to better conditions than it was before. And so we're going to be better than it was pre, but now we have to meet the 85-55 rule, which is a very difficult rule and requires ongoing maintenance of your pond or whatever, whether it's replacing media or doing significant excavation and treating that water. It's usually like a 1 to 3 year maintenance period, and it's very costly. So those are both things that we have to look at for all of these developments.
Totally. And I think each one of these blocks you can tell by well, let me run this. So, MLK was a main street, and often main streets are at the highest point. And so you identified that things typically flow east to west. And we do have part of the watershed cuts through that eastern portion. That is one of our advantages. And then every block is slightly different. We have land in some blocks, we don't have land. There are some stormwater, there are not stormwater. They're sloped differently. I don't think we're gonna have a 3-paragraph policy that fixes every block. And what I don't wanna do is create a year's worth of effort or $1 million of work and then nothing happens. And so, I don't know how we take information and vision and, if and when someone comes like a Judge Smiley, we say, okay, we know we have these tools. Now we're going to figure out this block because now we can take action on it. I've been in previous conversations about, private stormwater ponds are 2 engineered specs at time of CO and CA, but 30 years later, they may or may not be. And so even that, as stormwater ponds age, if they're not kept up, then you run into potential issues later. And so one of my thoughts was, and this has been a conversation ongoing, which is regional stormwater ponds, which is a huge upfront investment a lot of times, and that developers can then buy into, but then we maintain, we ensure that they're dug out, and they buy into them often either at an upfront price, or what I like is a long-term cost where they say, my goodness, I would much rather build buildings on this lot. Let me buy into yours. I don't have to maintain it. It doesn't have to be a hazard. It doesn't have to be an eyesore. And then it gives us a funding mechanism. I would take that idea further and ask, could we not, in these blocks, identify places for tree pits, bioswales, around stormwater drains, and create these little tiny, unnoticeable dozens of little spots throughout this district where we go block by block and we say, okay, to get development on that block, we have to put in 6 street trees and shape this one alley a certain way and find all these little things. And you have to cistern your roof to catch the rainwater off of it, because there's not going to be one big sword that just fixes the whole thing. It's going to have to be a toolbox of little things.
I agree with the toolbox. I think a couple of things that I want to make sure we put into two different categories. You've got one side that's pipe size and flooding, addressing, making sure that people don't get flooded when development happens. But then there's a nutrient side as well. And Stacy, you were there with me. There's definitely a new path that we're trying to chart with nutrient treatment that could be in master stormwater plans. But to the point in the MLK aspect, I don't know that master stormwater is gonna fix anything here. I think what may fix it is an actual identification and supporting micro development rather than massively large projects. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. If something is built under 2,500 square feet, how does that affect what we do with 2,500 square feet of impervious surface? What do we have to do with FDOT from that point?
FDOT is any new impervious.
Even 1 square foot?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's think about MLK when they built to where they are now. There was a lot more impervious surface that was there prior to it. And one of the things Michael's been very creative in helping with development services is crediting development with what was already existing impervious. We used to have houses, we used to have a lot of other businesses. That was all calculated into their calculations. Why should a new 2,500 square feet all of a sudden trigger this massive amount of changes on an area that now has more impervious surface than it ever has in its entire history? So is there a story that we could provide that would kind of recognize what's already been there through either aerial maps of what was previously there? Surely there's got to be a way for us to be able to communicate, no, it's not a net positive. We're still way less impervious than what we were 10 years ago.
Yeah, so when we spoke to them regarding the Sankofa, that was kind of what we had talked about, because a significant part of it is gravel. It used to be homes. So I had talked to the developer, or the engineer at the time, and told them, go and take some soil samples and to show, like, yes, via, survey, this is dirt, but if you bore it, it's gravel, because that will help them with their impervious numbers. And when we talked to FDOT, they said they were open to that.
Okay,
Really,
good.
what they're looking at is at the time that they did their calculations for that road, what was pre and post. So if you can show at the time that they built the road and that they did their calculations for the runoff to the road, that was, if it was existing then they would count that.
So there is potential that we have a bank of impervious surface that existed post, pre, whatever you want to say, construction of this road in the 90s, I think is when this was built, early 90s, that could become a almost credit bank that we can show FDOT, hey, there's this much impervious that we've got banked from what you guys did in your original calculations. Therefore, we shouldn't have to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably, knowing the way that FDOT has approached a lot of stuff, it would probably be like inlet by inlet, like
Okay.
whatever was draining to this inlet needs to be the same amount. Like you would have a bank per crossing, essentially. That's usually how they think. They don't think of it as the whole corridor had X amount of impervious, and now we may shift it all here because their pipes are sized for that flow. But yes, in theory, yes.
Is there a way, what would it take you guys to actually get to that research as well as an identifiable number of what impervious looked like, mid-90s versus what it is today?
I mean, I think we could reach out to them and ask them for their model either at the time or their calculations at the time. I know that they have talked to us about giving us kind of the model for certain crossings of what the flow calculation was at that time. It maybe requires some reverse engineering to get back to their impervious numbers, but it would really just be getting their records.
And why this is important, because if we can show that we've got credit of impervious, then essentially that we can take off, at least for the first several, we can get moving on things without having to worry about these massive amounts of stormwater calculations.
Can we buy into the DOT ones? Are we allowed to go into those?
So we did
Like on
approach
11th
them,
and
we had
MLK?
a conversation, they originally said no, but then they came back and said, well, yes, but then they came back and they said, well, but we're changing our own stormwater ponds, they're discharging to less. Did we end up with any positive results from that?
I haven't heard back from them if they've run the numbers on that pond that they suggested that we look at. But I know in part of your document, you had mentioned using Henry Davis as kind of like a stormwater park, which that's kind of part of what FDOT had suggested. There is a pond near Henry Davis that was used primarily as kind of like a treatment, maybe for like flash flood attenuation purposes. It was never actually permitted as a full
Right.
active pond. So, but right now, I know y'all have all been to Henry Davis. You might not have noticed, but there are storm structures everywhere. I mean, massive multi-pipe storm structures. There may be potential for us to actually close some of those drains off and allow it to stage in the pond or in the park for a short period of time instead of letting it immediately drain to a pipe.
So I'll clarify that before it gets moved around. So Seaside, if you've ever been to the amphitheater, we all know this. The amphitheater is actually a stormwater pond, but it stays dry. And so I'm not advocating for ripping out playing equipment.
Oh, no.
In fact, you actually there are cities that have rolled their park system into public works because it's funded by stormwater and those kind of things. Kids aren't playing in the middle of hurricanes or flash flooding events. So you flood them and then it dissipates.
It stages very temporarily. It's for flash flood attenuation purposes. It only holds water for a couple of hours and then it's made to perk out. It's essentially, if you imagine like when your pool will like hold water and then as everything else drains, then your pool will return to its natural stage, right? So like it's just gonna sit there and hold water until all the pipes can relieve out to the bay, tides go down, and then it will release. So I know Cascades Park is you honestly, if you go there, you can't even tell that it's meant for that. But in a flash flood event, it will flood. No one's at the park during heavy flash flood events, and
If they
so
are, they leave.
but exactly.
Float away.
It's
But
their fault for flooding, being in the
it
flood.
saves structures. So would you rather a recreational park flood or a home? So that's really the trade-off. Obviously, we want people where people are seeking refuge during a storm to be saved over a recreational area.
So how much of MLK corridor could turning Henry Davis Park into a stormwater reservoir?
It could be the solution for Sankofa, because it's an easy pipe connection from that development down to Henry Davis. It could also provide extra treatment capacity for some other neighboring ones. Obviously, it would have to be in the same drainage basin. It would have to drain to that park to count for it, but pretty much all the area north of it does drain to it.
Yeah, there was in my document I sent, there were some ideas of lessening the permeable surfaces, and I wanted to make sure that we have policies, that these would matter, and that we have policies in place to allow for this, like loading docks, dumpster areas, fire lanes. There's all these other places that we can potentially encourage gravel, or maybe we have a gravel parking lot district if that helps that much. If a lot of land on MLK has to have parking, and the only way to get a development there is to have a little gravel parking lot where the ADA is concrete, I would be supportive of that. So just making sure that we have the tools in place to lessen some of the permeable surfaces.
In my experience with gravel, and the reason why I personally have been very anti-gravel is that it does silt up ponds and it silts up our bays, and it does require a lot of maintenance. And a lot of times it will get into our right-of-ways and into our storm drains. In right-of-ways, it can cause trip hazards. It's dangerous for skateboarders or bicyclists, but it also can get into our storm drains and clog them up. It doesn't stay where it's supposed to stay.
Leaves with
But
their tires.
yes, and frequently, what I will see in places, industrial places that will, so my parents have a business, their entire parking lot is gravel. I actually went recently to go look at their pond to see if it needed to be maintained. It was completely silted over, and it was not perking the way it was designed to perk because of the gravel silting up the pond.
I believe our
So-
code shows gravel as impervious.
It technically, yes, so that's for a credit purpose. So if someone has a gravel parking lot and they want to pave it, we do not make them do stormwater offset for that. We consider it impervious, but we do not at this time allow gravel parking lots.
Yeah, for me as an investor, if someone said, your project's feasible, if you can do gravel, and maybe there's an annual cost for an inspection, it's $100 or, I would be willing to make a development feasible on a piece of property. Same with stormwater, like you could put stormwater on your property or buy into ours, and it's an annual fee, it's $1,000 or $800. That, I would much rather pay for things long-term to get something started, and then catch the appreciation of the property and bet on that, than just not have a project work out.
Talk more about the cost of silting and clearing that up, because it sounds like that's the downside, and is that downside expensive?
Yeah, so, well, we talk about ponds are not typically maintained over time. So if they're not maintained over time, then they're not providing the right treatment and attenuation, so it can cause off-site flooding if people are not maintaining their pond. So the siltation you would essentially have to go in and dig out the bottom of your pond. You may have to go back and put clean fill in and then resod the bottom of your pond. If it's a wet pond, that's obviously much more difficult because you can't just wait until a dry period and do that. You would have to pump down your pond and do the same thing, dig out the bottom, put in some clean fill.
And
So-
how does the new ruling from December affect this?
So actually, the new rule requires, and I'm honestly not sure if it's an annual, or every 1 year, every 2 year, but you have to get your pond recertified. And you actually have to have it signed off that it is providing the right treatment and the right, like that your media is being replenished or changed out. And the maintenance entity, which we've had a couple of people ask the city if they will be their maintenance entity for their private ponds because they don't want that long-term maintenance cost. That maintenance entity is the one who's responsible and is the one FDP will go after if they are not getting those
So that was a hard
maintenance.
no for the city to be in charge, right?
Absolutely.
So Stacy, to that point, like, taking into account how many ponds we have on MLK that are now, like, what would you estimate the annual maintenance cost would be if we were to go and provide, regular maintenance? I mean, regardless whether it's silted or not, there's a level of maintenance that should be taking place on ponds regardless. So how much more is it really talking about versus, you know, if it was maintained appropriately, is the silting actually like a significant issue?
Right now, I don't think we have any official city ponds
it's all
on
state.
MLK.
It's all
Um,
state,
DOT.
yeah.
Yes.
Except Henry Davis is on MLK. So
Right, but that
one-
pond, the FDOT pond is right next to it. We just have like I said, it's not an official pond. We go and mow it and clear it, I think, twice a year. That's really all we do because it's not an official dry pond or wet pond. It's honestly looks more like a rain garden
If
wetland
we
area.
designated one parcel on every block to be a catch basin, would that suffice to what you know now as a,
And is that a central pond, stormwater you're talking about?
for the block?
Okay, right, for the block.
Yeah, I mean, depending on size, obviously, yes. I mean, we could do a regional stormwater pond per block. I honestly cannot tell you what the cost is. Right now, part of permitting it is that the engineer has to provide an O&M cost to the long-term maintainer because FDEP realizes that it's an expensive responsibility and they want the operator to know how much they're buying in for annually. So that is not something that, I think there's probably a couple engineers out there who have gotten projects approved by FDEP, but I know it's very slim, the number that have been approved under the new rule.
So Stacy, what do we need to provide you from the standpoint of, this rule change was very drastic. However, it also opened up a door of opportunity from Northwest Florida Management side on the regional facilities and how they're permitted. So for those of you, and you said this in one of your lists, it's gotta be in the same basin. Well, how FDP and Northwest Florida are now interpreting that must be in the same basin, they're interpreting it based upon the bay as the basin,
The bay?
the bay. So, because ultimately, the end result of all of our nutrients are ending up in the bay. So their philosophy is you can create master stormwater facilities that offsite and provide a net positive benefit versus having to do 1,000 other ponds, because they don't want 1,000 ponds too. It's more administrative work for them to have to go and inspect. And so, as a result, what that means is you could have a nutrient treatment along the railroad tracks behind Sam's Club that could offset the nutrient counts for development that's on MLK. That was what was explained to
Well,
us.
what about the flow? Because
The flooding is a different thing. So
that's
that-
flow, because it flows east to west, so Sam's Basin is not,
it ends up in the bay, so does the other basin. So as a result,
It's called
you're in the same
compensatory
basin.
treatment, so
Okay.
you're compensating by treating something else, even, because it eventually gets to the same
Okay.
spot. It might not be the actual polluted water itself, but if you treat a different level of polluted water, they say, essentially it commingles and it averages out.
About 2031 or somewhere around there, don't we have to have
2032.
2032 explain the water treatment that has to go into the bay? We have to do
That's
something
the
to it.
we have to remove our effluent from the bay. So, currently our effluent at both of our wastewater treatment plants is discharged after it's treated. It's discharged to the bay. 98% of other cities in Florida. So by 2032, we have to either do deep well injection, reuse irrigation, wetland recharge, some other method of getting rid of our effluent water besides discharging it directly to the bay.
Okay. We've gotta have some wetlands somewhere on this 224 pieces of dirt we have. Can we use that to go into mitigation banks? Can we play with that to help trade out for ponds?
I think those are
Are those two different
separate,
worlds?
yeah,
Okay.
two totally different worlds.
We don't have a lot of wetlands on MLK.
No,
Boulevard.
no,
Maybe behind there is what I'm saying, is somewhere that we own property east, west, north, south, all around MLK.
we
I
have
mean-
little pockets in this area, but nothing very large. The wetland recharge rate is like a couple inches per, square foot. So it's not a whole lot. You have to have hundreds and hundreds of acre. So we're looking at Panama City North and a lot of the wetlands that cannot be touched in some of these subdivisions that have already been, protected as part of, Liberty and, Shelton and all that. There's a lot of wetlands that they are not allowed to touch. So we have talked to them about doing wetland recharge in those acres, cause we're talking 800 acres of wetlands up there.
It's expensive
So
per acre.
do the
Yeah.
tree pits not solve the nutrient issue? Explain more about the nutrient issue and.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention, what you were talking about basin-wide, is there are boxes, and like, this research is so new that even when we talk to FDP about it, they're like, we don't have numbers on this stuff. It's very new, and you're gonna have to find out from the person who tells you about this technology what their research shows and turn it into us, and we're just gonna have to take your word for it, essentially.
So in other words, it's a very opportune time to do something.
So there are these structures. I know we've talked about bay savers a lot, and we talked about how bay savers really just get rid of sediment, right? So they're baffle boxes. Well, there are new baffle boxes. Part of this rule, when companies saw this coming down the line, they saw an opportunity to essentially do an upgraded bay saver. So it's a baffle box, but it has media in it, and the media it provides your treatment, right? So obviously there's a flow to where your media has optimal treatment. Now in a flash flood event, you're going to have flow going through there so much that it's not going to get your
But
full.
that's how it is with everything.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is if we found our outfalls in this basin and put those baffle boxes at the outfalls and then did some upstream, because another caveat to this is unless you do a full dry pond with no discharge, you're never going to get your 85-55 nutrient load reduction with one treatment alone. A wet pond will not do it alone. A baffle box will not do it alone. Pretty much a dry pond where there's no discharge is the only way you're going to do it. So we would have to do something else to get that full 85-55, but maybe the pond upstream is just a little smaller. And we do those baffle boxes at our outfalls.
What do
You
you
just
need
spoke
from?
very engineering.
Yeah.
Someone might have a master's degree in all
Yeah,
this. I
somebody
don't
like,
know.
yeah.
So, but
Baffled me.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I think that the point is, if you look at what Alan, I think Alan, you provided this, I don't know. If you didn't, it looks like staff did, so you did a good job with
It's
your.
just Dover
with your,
Call staff.
Okay,
To
yeah,
to be clear, I printed it out, but it's 100% his content.
And that's Dover Coal's content.
okay.
I don't know that.
Can I-
So on these resilient infrastructures list
Yeah.
that we have here, is there a way for us to have a standard design with an assigned treatment number put onto these that someone could drop in, like a tree thing? Like, we recognize this as you're treating, 300 gallons with this, or whatever it comes down to. Is there a way to do that?
I don't see why not. I actually we were talking, when we were talking about some of the city's projects and how our projects will fit into this rule. What I envision is that up front, we want to put in more trees in some of our developments, right? So up front, year 1 through 5, the trees may not have a high nutrient load reduction, but they may by year 10, 15, 20, right? So up front, we may have to do more media changes in our outlet, right? But
What's a media change? What-
so there's media.
Like a
It's-
HEPA filter
Media's-
for
It's-
your
Yes,
HVAC.
it's engineered. It's engineered, like kind of activated charcoal,
Okay.
something like that. It's a filter
All right.
media. It's
It's a
engineered.
Brita filter.
Thank you.
Exactly.
For our bag.
And essentially at a certain point it gets all used up and it's no more. It's not useful anymore, so you got to replace it.
Fair.
So and in these boxes, there's a bunch of different companies out there that say their media is the best. So you pick one and you
They
just,
give you a
cross your finger.
calculation
Yeah,
that says, hey, this is the number that it does.
Exactly.
And then that's what you supply.
Yep, so that's what you supply. You would have to test it and make sure that it's providing that treatment annually as they want you to. But like I said, right now it's also experimental and kind of in flux that I'm sure they're giving everybody a little bit of grace. But if we say we have some trees and we say, okay, up front, and I'm making these numbers up, please do not hold me to these. We say up front each tree provides a 5% phosphorus and a 3% nitrogen removal, until it's 5 years old. And then when it's 10 years old, we get an extra percent. And then as they get older, they have even more and more nutrient removal, right? So we're relying less on the media at the outfall, and now we're routing it through tree pits that provide like a treatment train. So you're getting some treatment here and then further down, and as we have larger storm events, they may all be providing treatment, and then it gets to the outfall where then the media provides its final treatment.
Let me see if I follow you here. Who knew that pine trees drank so much water?
Yeah.
During that? Who knew that we've never had mosquitoes and gnat problems, because now we have puddles? So if you plant trees that are drinking water, you're saying does that get you a credit, or does that get you something for stormwater?
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, so Michael, when my world of credits is if it has bathrooms or sinks before, we get credits when we're coming in for a new permit on a residential lot. Sure. Okay, how does that work on impervious surface? I didn't know you gave credits for that. Is it if I have less than, or I had more than I have now, or what I get a credit for? A half a credit, because that's all I'm getting really on the old stuff.
If you're coming in with the same amount of impervious surface, then yeah, you could essentially credit for that.
Net neutral, yeah.
And actually, our code, the way it's currently written, is you can increase that impervious up to 2,000 square feet instead of net new and not have to treat stormwater. But the caveat is it cannot create an adverse
Offsite impact.
Okay, so if we came up with credits that against stormwater ponds, now that puts that expense on the property developer, but it's much cheaper probably to do so and easier to maintain.
Yes.
Yeah, to me, the pipe dream is literally street trees and little bioswales with little bushes in them, and it's all paid for by an ongoing annual cost of, from a person who says, I would much rather spend $500 a year on the street trees than me put a stormwater pond on my property.
Yeah, so you're saying essentially we say we have enough flow for, 20,000 square feet of impervious surface, and they have to pay in per square feet that they take out of that bank, and that maintains that system. And then we would have another system that they would buy into once that gets used
Yeah,
up.
because to me, trees add value to the neighborhood, increase the property values, and hit all the things.
Reduce heat
Stormwater
island
pond.
effects.
Yeah, and stormwater ponds are great and necessary, but if we can avoid the large stormwater ponds, because they aren't super pretty, a little bit of a liability, ongoing maintenance.
So, going back to the alley, gravel is not recommended, is what I understand. Is there something else? Grates? I don't know.
Well, why is gravel not counted as impervious?
It is counted as impervious.
No, because of the silting problem it creates, the high maintenance
It's just not
costs.
I would not recommend it as part of a treatment system if it flows into a stormwater pond or into our systems. It's not, and it requires a pretty hefty maintenance cost.
Could we do grates?
Well, so gravel in areas where people move cars.
Mm-hmm.
So a bioswale is a layering of gravel to create the media. So you layer, like, there's a bioswale behind history class I'm very proud of. It's the little tiny curb between the curb and the building is like 3 feet, and it goes down about 8 feet, and it's like sand and rock and pebbles and all the different things that I looked at on the internet, and it takes all the water off the history class roof and it disappears it. Unless you're getting more than an inch of rain for 3 or 4 hours, and then it overflows the curb and goes down the storm drain. And so I'm really proud that it was like $5,000 for all of it. And so she's seemingly opposed to it for cars and travel people because it gets moved around and cars tracking dirt and that kind of thing.
Do you have
Compacts it.
gravel?
Yeah, you don't even see it. It's underneath
It's
our
buried,
AC
yeah.
units, and it's behind a fence, and we have
It works really well for roof water,
Yeah, it works
because
really-
it's pretty clean.
But I think the key is it has a barrier to keep it contained,
yeah.
and you don't walk on it, and you don't drive on it.
Yeah. So I would ask, and back to your question, which is, are there other other types of drivable surfaces that are pervious that you would recommend? One of them, I know there's like a breeze block type of a thing that little grass grows through, but are there other sort of?
Because it seems to make sense that the alley, I know you mentioned the downside of parking that we would take away from that. And the developer would then have to weigh the cost of stormwater or parking. And parking is something that we could address in a different regulation. So just trying to make that alley feasible.
Yeah, there is a product, and I'm sure there's lots of products like this, but they've presented to me, I actually have samples on my desk in my office if y'all wanna look. There's two products, one is called FlexiPave and one's called PermaDrive. FlexiPave is more for like, landscaped islands instead of mulch and pine straw and rock, which also frequently does not like to stay contained in a landscape area, and also requires a costly maintenance. It's cheap up front, but when you look at like 5-10 year maintenance costs, it's probably the same price as FlexiPave. PermaDrive is a drivable pavement surface that is very similar, but it can just hold up to vehicle traffic, and it allows for percolation of water through it. So you would dig down, you have to have a good base layer underneath it, and then you would put this, it kind of rolls on maybe like similar to asphalt, and then, but it's a rocky pervious, and you can actually do the street sweeper on top of it and recover any fines. That's something that pervious pavement requires maintenance still, because when it also gets silted over, right? You have sand that runs through with the water, so if you're having like a street sweeper or something that can come through and recover that and allow it to still perk is beneficial.
I don't know how much of this that we should dive in to try and solve everything at one time, because, I mean, out of everything that we've talked about, I think identifying and crediting the previous impervious surface could yield quite a bit of runway for us to see projects move forward. And then I think in signing and calculations to these that have been provided in the Dover Coal, like that could provide a tool for engineers to use and drop into their projects to help offset some stuff. I love the cartridge idea too. So I don't know if there's a standardization that we could look at it dropping at every outfall in the city. I mean, there's like 60 or 70. I don't know how many there is.
What's the
So,
cartridge?
The cartridge
The
is the
baffle box.
filtration that she was talking about.
Baffle.
with the-
Baffle.
So if you think about the, yeah, so.
That's why I didn't know. Yeah.
But
Neither did
out of those three, you know, I mean, look, I've never gotten a response from FDOT as far as on this specific project that they're not willing to help me get to a yes. Like they want to help get to a yes. But they also can't abandon their calculations without triggering other state agencies from making them to come and to do other things. So the impervious calculations would be very helpful, I think, in that conversation. And then anything that we've got for standardized proof that, hey, this is what's getting added, that could produce enough positive impact that maybe we could see a lot. Because once you start going through the permitting process with FDOT, we're gonna start talking about pipe size and all of the other things that come with that, and you get into, so even if we solve 1,000 different things on this tiny little parcel, you know, Big Brother could come in and say, hey, you know, sorry, you're over inundating my pipe, and so therefore you must fix all of it.
There's also products, honeycomb type products that are for erosion control that do a better job of holding gravel. They're not perfect. There are actually some sprays you can put on top of gravel to make them a little tighter, but I'd love to see alternative products that we could use in gravel situations that would better lock gravel in. Surely someone's done that somewhere of saying, hey, we get it, dumpster pad's not gonna be used a whole lot. You can use gravel, you gotta use 57 gravel, you gotta put it in this sort of structure to maintain it. And then there's a fee, maybe it's $40 a year for us to come by and be like, nah, your gravel's.
Can I make a
suck it up.
suggestion on that same one? Because I understand completely why gravel is much cheaper than having to do asphalt, engineering, all sorts of other stuff that comes to it. Could it be that everything goes through iteration? And so in St. Andrews, we're getting rid of our gravel parking lots for the reasons that you described. However, not every community is at that point. Like if we tried to do that 20 years ago, like it would have been very prohibitive for people that, we would have never had any of those parking lots if they had to be pavement at the very beginning. So is there a way that maybe we could just say, hey, if you'll do the driveway so that the main point of entry is, maybe that's concrete, but the rest of it can be gravel, so that there's some, our pavers, you know, anything of a solid surface in the main connection point with our infrastructure. But the rest of it, you know, for the next however many years can be gravel, for just sheer parking areas.
Yeah, my dad actually, when he built his car wash on Back Beach Road 20 years ago, the apron of the driveways, pavers, because it was a reduction of stormwater. Because he had to buy some wetland somewhere and donate it to the state to be able to do the project.
Josh, I agree with you that we don't want to solve everything. However, could we also ask, I guess it'd be Michael's department, come up with credits that you can get against stormwater ponds? Give them let's come up with the ideas of how we can go to the public and say, if you'll do these things, you don't have to do this.
Right, like a cistern on the roof or, yeah.
Right, and that works in conjunction with your piping, because now you may not have to have it.
Yeah.
What size tree, calipers of trees matter, breast diameter, height. And that way, we can start figuring out where somebody can spend some money to save some money, and get going on pretty, because the permitting thing will slow it down too, wouldn't it? I mean.
Oh, yeah, it
DOT,
will, yeah. Well, and it's not just the permitting, it's the having to work through someone as smart as Stacy in the private market to actually even get to the point that you even get to the calculation. So some people have to go spend, I mean, I can only imagine what Sankofa Group spent on engineering thus far, just to get where they're at. And it is a huge risk, when every layer of expertise and expert that you put onto that's why I'm so focused on having an impervious bank from what previously was there could be the spark that's needed to get to the next step.
Can you
Now,
get credits for impervious and existing, impact, like bathrooms and sinks? Let's say there was a building there plus impervious. Can you get credits for both if it was there before?
Yeah, are you talking about like you get credits for the number of fixtures that were there?
Right, from the
Yep.
impact fees.
That's,
So that-
yep,
that's-
utility fee, you get credits for that, and then for
Yeah.
impervious surface, you get credits for
So
the,
you take Google Earth and go back in time and see what was there, and now you know that you can have credit for
Yeah.
parking and for the building that was there, whatever was there, if it had fixtures.
because you're not changing it. I do want to ask the question, MLK Junior Rec Center. So we now have a stormwater facility there that was not there previously. I mean, I would think that actually took off demand from FDOT infrastructure. Am I incorrect in that?
their rules may have changed. I know that they did change, like the multi-day storm thing is relatively new. And I'm not sure if we had a larger impervious footprint. I don't know what the whole
Okay.
story behind that, I wasn't here unfortunately,
But would that be part of your analysis on
It
trying
could
to
be,
get
yeah.
to, you know, what this impervious bank could be? And what do we need to provide to you guys? I mean, for me, master stormwater has been a passion of mine for 4 years now. And we have yet to get a stormwater pond facility yet. I think that's the same thing with these. Like, what do you guys need to actually get us to assign numbers to the bioswales and have an impervious bank? And how do we get to that point? Because ultimately, every day that we sit and wait is a day of opportunity for something to happen on MLK.
It seems to me that the path forward is the plan. If staff knows we want the plan and they can go and put it together and bring it to us, those are the steps. And so I guess we need to be clear about what we want and what direction we want them to work in as a group. And when they bring it back to us, we don't change our minds. We say, you've done what we've asked you to do. And so I think what's important in what we're doing here today is saying we have a major corridor that development is stifled on, and we want something to move. We want to move it using the city resources to move forward with the development. And so I've heard a consensus among us about the stormwater plan for Henry Davis Park, and also the interest in the baffles, bioswales, and gravel or grading or so forth. I think the difference with what you said about St. Andrews, 20 years ago and gravel, was that it was acceptable and there wasn't the downsides of the expense of upkeep that we now know, that if we do that now, we're baking in an expensive matter for either the city or the developer or both.
Well, and in fairness to the St. Andrews lots, those are common community lots that get used a lot now. And 20 years ago, they probably weren't used as much, and so the gravel, the horseshoe shells weren't getting thrown around as much, and there's probably only a handful of people parking on them. So, it works as a temporary solution for a light usage on a lot temporarily, maybe. I think to Josh's point, if we don't have some sort of, hey, we're willing to entertain, like sort of like the Dover Coal stuff, like, hey, here's some options and here's what to look at, it probably is easier for an engineer just to say, stormwater pond, than to go like, oh, here's all these little things and have multiple conversations. We have to really show them that we actually would almost, I would love to see us engaging people saying, please don't build a stormwater pond, here's other things we can do with you. We want
Yeah.
more buildings.
I think,
Jared brought show and tell, for us. You wanna explain what you got there? Yeah.
That's from my office. One you can tell feels kind of rubbery. That's
Yep.
Flexi Pave. That is what you would find in like a landscaped island. Imagine instead of the typical mound landscape islands that you see where the rocks and the mulch and the pine straw are mounded up over the curbs, instead more of a depressed landscape island with that in the bottom. And we're actually going to be doing this at a couple of our new parking lots,
Yeah.
where there's going to be a small inlet pipe coming from the curb into the landscaped island, which would allow the stormwater to stage up in the landscape island, and then an outlet pipe high on the other side to allow, once it's gotten too high, it'll overflow, and then we'll have a series of those, which will allow for treatment. And actually a lot that was 100% impervious before, we're now providing stormwater treatment in it. And then Permadrive is the one you can, if you put it on the table, it's rocky and
That's
harder.
the one
That's
on
the
top.
one that you can drive
label.
on. In typical applications that I've seen that are kind of interesting would be to do that in a bike lane or in a fire lane, or sometimes like in the middle strip, instead of having a crowned road, you would have it inversed, and you would have that Permadrive in the middle, which would put all of the stormwater in the middle of it, and then you could have a sock pipe underneath that would remove it. So there's some interesting ways to utilize it. It wouldn't have to be 100% paved with that Permadrive, but you could come up with some, essentially areas that are low lying, but we don't have existing stormwater infrastructure. You could pave, a corner. I know you've all seen those bird baths in areas where it just holds water for a couple hours or a day or two after a storm and just wasn't graded properly. Having that in that area would help with that. So also, I know that you had talked about trees, and I know you had kind of talked about maybe planting and giving trees to people in the right of way. I made a bunch of phone calls, spoke to some really great people, and I want to say that almost universally, the way that is funded is by tree mitigation credits. And that's not something that we typically do now. I think we may have a setup to do it for protected trees. But essentially how they do it is that if you are clearing a lot, every tree that you clear has to be paid for. So you are going to mitigate by clearing trees. Now, obviously, if it's a tree of less interest, it would not be very expensive. But if you're going to remove a 48-inch diameter oak tree, it may be a substantial cost to you. Now, that cost goes directly into a tree mitigation bank that every year, any citizen, and I know there's a couple that may limit how many each citizen can request each year. Now, they could request maybe 2 a year, but they would say, hey, I want one in the right of way in front of my house. Some even allow them to put it on their private property. It just has to be within a certain distance of the right of way. And obviously they have rules based on what trees you can plant underneath utility lines, next to water and sewer lines, next to sidewalks, and how close you can be to a road. But the city will come out, look at the area you want, decide what tree would be best there, and if a tree isn't good there, maybe they would suggest another location, and the city will plant that tree for you. A lot of the municipalities require the requester to take care of that tree, at least for the first 3 years. But there are also really cool products. One is called a tree diaper, and it is essentially just a tube that's made out of compostable material that absorbs water when it rains, or you could water it yourself, and it will water the tree for, I think, at least a month on its own. So you could provide them with a tree and a tree diaper that would allow them to only have to water it maybe once a month, and then now they have a tree in the right of way that was funded by someone tearing down a tree somewhere else in the city.
That would have been really cool to have when we were doing Cherry Street.
Yeah.
Not putting, so, couple things. I think that provision also says if it's not in the footpath of building. If it's in the
Yes.
footpath of building, it is allowable to come
Yes.
out, otherwise you are penalized.
Yes.
So we would wanna make sure of that, because you don't wanna, we don't wanna tell somebody what they can't build. We wanna tell somebody if you're taking out because you want to, then could it also work in a replacement rather than pay for it?
Yes.
Okay. And then two, if you're gonna depress the road to do that, which is a cool idea, how do you build 12 inches above the crown of the road, which is in our code?
Yeah,
Is
that
there a
would-
way to calculate that out?
Yeah, I mean, it would probably be the opposite. It would be above the highest point of the road, which would then
Okay.
be the sides. But we don't have a whole lot of roads like that. Some of our older roads do not really even have a crown. That would really just be on a case-by-case basis. If we didn't have enough drainage on the side of the road, or there was no drainage, there are many roads in our city that do not have any inlets on the side, so there's no stormwater system. Maybe that's a good solution, instead of having to put in costly infrastructure on the sides. If we go in and repave, put a sock pipe underneath and drain it to the middle, but that would really, I'm not saying that we should do that everywhere, but it may be a case-by-case solution.
Stacy, is there an avenue to which we would not have civil engineering on individual sites? Is there, why I'm asking this question
Like an
is,
arborist?
it's like, no, like this is a great product.
Mhm.
However, it's not used heavily, one, because there's not very many engineers that understand how to use it. And also, there's not very many contractors that know actually how to do the product. And so a lot of the stuff that we encounter with smaller development on smaller lots has to do with the expense that's involved in every step of the process. And so I go back to the impervious bank is really the best bang for your buck to be able to do stuff. I mean, and I'm open to, do we remove impervious from other areas? Like, do we go and shrink the lot or the parking lot that's on whatever the one place, the little building that we've talked about multiple times? Does it need to have less parking so we can take that impervious and move it elsewhere? Like, what I'm trying to say is in every solution that's gonna involve a civil engineer, you're gonna reduce the amount of people that can actually take action on a project. So is there an avenue that you can see that would eliminate on smaller parcels the need for an engineer?
Yes, I think that on lots less than an acre, we could get there. I think that we can come up with credits from these bioswales, these trees that could maybe translate, maybe we could help them out by saying, hey, we have this approved by FDEP that a tree pit of this size removes X amount of phosphorus and nitrogen, and you can put that in your treatment. Or we come up with some solution on smaller lots. Now, lots over 1 acre, Matt thankfully reminded me whenever we had our meeting with FDEP about the marina. It doesn't matter what you're doing, even if you're improving the impervious. If it's over 1 acre, FDEP gets involved. So
Okay.
they're gonna require you to have a
So
civil
if you
engineer.
lot split to 0.98
Yes.
acres, what about them?
Do we have any lots over an acre on the?
We don't have very
on
many.
DOT?
On what?
On MLK?
Probably that one north of 11th Street, it's rather large. The rest of them, I was kind of clicking around, they're like
Most of them are
0.1,
small.
0.2.
Yeah, split it.
Yeah.
So a lot of those would be de
It's not
minimis.
one building, it's 3 buildings.
Our bigger tracks are like on East Avenue and, College, not on the main
Yeah,
thoroughfare.
I mean, the reality is stormwater is gonna be a government issue to solve more than a private issue to solve. We're trying to mitigate, the impacts and how much government has to do in handling stormwater. But what we're finding, including state government, is recognizing that like, well, if I leave it on private people, they don't maintain the ponds, they eventually go in decay, and the same impacts are there regardless. So the real
they don't
solution
develop.
is mitigation,
Especially
Ben,
not something small.
you know?
Yeah, I was gonna say, there is an option, I'm gonna throw this out here, and I honestly, either way you go, I will follow, your lead, but is there an appetite potentially, it's what it's sounding like from you guys, is that instead of maybe the 2,000 square foot impervious, maybe it's a lot size exemption? And if they're, instead of an exemption, maybe it's, they pay into a mitigation bank if they're over a certain amount of impervious, instead of having to do it, and then that puts it on the city to do maybe regional or basin-wide improvements.
Can 100% support it as long as we have a CRA grant program that helps offset the cost of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And so you're saying in each area, you're gonna have some sort of city pond or city, and I go and build a house and a commercial building, and I'm buying into that,
yeah.
if it's under an acre?
Yeah, or,
Okay.
yes, and maybe you say if your lot is, I mean, I don't know if you say under an acre, but if, because that would probably be like 90% of developments in the city, maybe you say if it's under 0.25, because when you're talking about 0.25 acres, it might be too difficult to actually develop and have a
You
pond.
can't do that on a
It-
quarter
can't.
acre.
we look at the size of a lot that says, hey, at this point, this size lot, you can't develop it and do stormwater. It's impossible. It makes a lot undevelopable. Maybe you look at what size y'all want that to be. I can come back with suggestions on what we're seeing is a developable lot size. And you can say, okay, if you're on this lot and you're developing over 2,000 square feet, you don't have to do stormwater, you just have to pay into a stormwater mitigation bank per square foot over that 2,000 that you're developing.
5,000 is the smallest, 5,500 or 5,000 square feet is the smallest residential, what is it now? We've changed it, haven't we, Michael?
The square footage,
Square foot.
5,000.
5,000. So you can do it based on what's on the code right now,
Yep.
you can say anything under 5,000, that's the smallest lot we allow. You know, or anything above that, just use what we have already that's
Which-
acceptable.
We don't require residential to do stormwater.
Exactly.
So,
But it does have to flow somewhere.
yes, exactly,
Yeah.
but I just, that's not the I mean,
Right.
FDOT might, although I know that townhome or quadplex next to the Sankofa development did not have to do stormwater, so.
No, the FDOT doesn't do it. It's got a state exemption, so it's state
there you go.
agencies aren't, if it's residential.
So residential is already exempt.
So what have you heard from us as consensus?
Yeah,
Potential.
You want a block by block approach, you wanna look at maybe what size lots are being discouraged from development because of the new rules, FDOT and ERP rules, and maybe come back with an exemption or a stormwater mitigation credit approach towards those lots. Also that you wanna look at outfall media baffle boxes, in different areas of the city, and what a standard treatment, standard details and standard treatment plans for tree pits and bioswales could be to standardize engineering, remove the civil engineering requirement from some of these smaller parcels, and require or allow people to have a credit process. And then to look into some gravel containment or some other pervious
Henry
pavement.
Davis
What trees, other than pine trees, being
You
top of the
missed a
list?
huge
I,
one.
yeah,
I
I
mean, they're
think,
great.
I think we have some in our code, what our
Okay.
protected
Right.
trees
Yeah,
are.
there
I
is.
don't know off the top
But
of
if
my
we
head.
take some of those
Yeah,
protected and just add, in terms of what you can put in to get the credit, if y'all also come up with that credit, I just wanna know what can I do to save having to go build a stormwater pond if I'm that developer?
Right.
And
Commissioner Street, we also heard the impervious bank.
Yeah, because
Yes.
here's the thing, is whatever you've got an impervious none of everything else that we just talked about doesn't even matter. I mean, you could go build something tomorrow, as long as you've got enough impervious credits to be
I
there.
mean, even with the Sankofa project, I mean, how many buildings were, impervious surfaces were removed just on their specific project that we may or may not be giving them credit for, that may or may break the project, I have no idea.
And the stormwater at Henry Davis Park.
Yes, that's already being looked at as part of that development. Right now, Anchor CEI, the engineer for Sankofa, has been looking at that in depth because they may need to use the majority of it for theirs. And I told them that if they needed modification of that the city would support it. So there may be some modification of that pond to meet their needs. So once they've decided whether or not they are gonna be utilizing that pond, we can look at further improvements to that pond to maybe expand upon that.
And in looking at where I see the city-owned properties, but there are also a lot of vacant properties
Yeah.
on MLK. And using the reference you gave us earlier, the flow east to west,
West to east.
west to
Yes.
east. What is it that we can do to, like with the properties that we own are mostly on the east side? And so are those more problematic because they're on the, or less problematic because they're on the east side insofar as stormwater? So we're really, okay.
So maybe we have a different approach on the west side, maybe it is, I can't tell from here,
I'll give you
there are a
one.
few alleys, but maybe we could devote some alleys, or maybe we acquire property or trade properties for other ones?
This site right here, which is on MLK, it's on the 10 lots that Sheila gave to us. That's right north of the stormwater at 11th and MLK. It also has a water outfall right in the middle, right up there by the road. So you got a narrow lot. It's a great for a little small commercial spot, but it's the stormwater part messes it up.
Yeah.
So how can you trade that out? And there's an alley
There's
behind
not
it. Can
much
you-
you can do.
There's not much you can do, so
Yeah.
it hurts, and we own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Stacy, is there a path in which, based upon your credit scenario, or hey, you can pay in and you can do those things, is there a method that even private owners may be able to sell capacity? And you might see some private development that builds stormwater solutions for us, with the ability to be able to sell that capacity to other development.
100%. If someone is discharging to a pond now, all I would require, that's not theirs, all I would require is a letter from the owner stating that they have given them a permission to do this, and something in their stormwater report, which they all had when their stormwater pond was done, saying that they have that additional capacity for that flow. And it's very common for them to overbuild a pond to provide extra
Could
capacity.
we require connection of stormwater ponds? Like similar how we have with parking lots on 23rd Street?
I don't know how that would be
that?
legally, given that they are private ownership. I don't know if we could require that.
Cross access?
How does that,
Yeah.
well, how does that work to? So how does that work with, like, do you have to, to be able to off-site your stormwater, do you have to directly pipe into it, or can it be down the stream from from the watershed? Because that's how regional works, is it like, as long as it's in the watershed, you can buy into it?
So I guess it would depend on how it gets to the regional pond. Now, if it has to go across private property, our code currently doesn't allow that, because you cannot shed your water onto someone else's property, because that could cause negative offsite impacts. Now, if it was maybe going down city infrastructure and eventually got to that pond, or
Like the
went
railroad
down-
track is a great example.
Yeah, or if the city had, roadside ditches and swales that it went down to get there, that would be an acceptable method. You just couldn't shed across other people's private property.
So essentially, you could put anything along the railroad ditch. It could be a mile down the road, but because it's all connected, it could still count.
Yeah.
So on MLK, if we had the city pipe that the west side folk, and then there was one pipe one way across the street that was a public way, instead of each property owner having to make sure they get across the street.
Yeah, so I mean, you could potentially have some north-south pipes on the west side that then would funnel to maybe a city lot, and the city would just have to permit the crossing with FDOT, but it would be a city pipe crossing the FDOT road, and then connect it to the east side that way, is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yes. So that reduces the cost as well for private developers.
Right, and let's remember that when people are gonna talk to you about this, people pay lots and lots of millions of dollars to live in houses that look at stormwater ponds across this country. It's called golf courses. And, so we're not used to that here. So you can really make them look pretty, you can really make them look attractive. At the end of the day, it's a stormwater pond on a golf course, and it's a stormwater pond on the road.
Yeah, and
But both
that's-
of them, they all bring high dollars.
That's a bone of contention for me and others, that we've got prime property on MLK, at least 4 of them, that are ugly ponds, that you really, and then they fence them off, so they can't even be like a little park or anything. So, as we talk about MLK corridor development, I'd like to see us incorporate, some beauty and function
Yeah.
into, these stormwater
A lot of that
areas.
has to do
Design.
with slope and depth of the pond. It's a safety issue. They
Yeah.
don't want to get sued if a child fell in the pond. That's why they,
I will say there are some great examples of creative stormwater pond design in the new sections of Sweet Bay, if you haven't driven them. They've got walking paths around them, they've got all types of, they've turned what would be, what you just described as a stormwater pond into more of an amenity.
And so I'd like to see us plan for that and incorporate that in this redevelopment of the MLK corridor. The Dover Coal Plan has given us quite a bit to work with, and if we follow this, I think we'll get to where we're trying to go.
I'd also like to add, back to the citizen-initiated tree in the road or near the road program of other cities. I'd like to have us somehow codify a policy or just have it where when we redesign our own parking lots, and we're kind of already doing it, and actually, the parking lot behind the Martin Theater kind of has a little bit of a bioswale on the backside of Grace Avenue, it overflows and, but I want that to be just a regular thing that we do. And I'd love to see a program stood up at some point. I think we have, I'd talk to Dale Cromwell. I bet you he would be willing to volunteer some of his GIS lookup engineering information. He's a huge part of the Audubon Society and loves that kind of stuff. And I don't think it has to be, you know, my bar of success is very low. If it was like one tree a week or two trees a month, it's not 88,000 trees deployed in 6 days across Panama City.
I think that's one thing, just to echo what Alan's saying, is like, we talk a lot about things, but then we don't actually have the tangible progress in them. And that's no fault, I mean, it's a complex system. I think on the master stormwater process, we've got Robinson Bayou study, we've got all this conservatory property that the Bay Conservatory wants to be a part of. We have very strategically across the city a way to do master stormwater mitigation. But if we don't get development happening on our main corridors, we're never gonna have a tax base that's gonna support any of that. And so if we can get some like really tangible action steps, like maybe in the next 30 to 60 days of something that we can get, like, hey, we can move this across the finish line, whether that's the impervious calculations, whether it's the standardization
And the
of
credit's
tree
easy,
wells,
isn't it?
like those things. Like, if we can get any of those, that would be a huge spark to MLK. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're
Like
looking
that.
for staff to go, ooh, that one's a big, tough one to get done. And these are the easier ones to get done, so, you know, it's on you guys to tell us, like, hey, here's
I don't even know if that's reasonable.
policy options.
I mean, we'll call FDOT if one of y'all want to be on the phone.
Josh
Yeah,
Maltby,
That would
they
be
love
great.
Josh.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it does, I mean, whether or not they have the records is going to be question number one. And if we can get a hold of them and if they're willing to work with us on that, that would be great. And then, I mean, I think a lot of this too will be a conversation that I need to do some research and have some conversations with FDEP about some of these credits for some of these other methods like bioswales and tree pits to see kind of where their head's at with it. Because I would like to have a standardized plan that not just for small parcels, but that could be used for all parcels. Even if they're exempt from ERP, they may not care so much about the credits, but for a large parcel, they could use these credits, and maybe we allow them to use them somewhere else in the city. Maybe we let them put a tree pit in somewhere else and give them credit for it. But that's something that we can look at standardizing, but like I said, the research is kind of new, so we'll have to dig in and kind of see if we can find something that'll satisfy FDEP.
FDEP or FDOT?
FDEP
Okay.
with the nitrogen,
The nutrient.
The
nitrogen
nutrient side, yeah.
and phosphorus removal.
I never knew how much I love trees. So there's a million of them in 3 hours.
We actually emailed some recently with the mayor. We're gonna look at maybe some of the O2 design and see if there's a few opportunities for that to kind of, you know, trial some. You know, area O11 and O12 downtown those were already designed, you know, a year before Stacy joined, you know, the city. And so, but, you know, we're still very early in the O2 process, which is moving further north. So we'll see if we can find a few spots to maybe try to experiment with some of that as well. With the tree pits and specifically, that's one thing the mayor wants to see downtown.
Well, and we can always say, you know, if we're doing citizen-led, we want trees in our roads, we can set aside CRA money, and I mentioned in there, I don't know if CBGB money's allowed for this kind of stuff. But we can always set aside, all right, this area of town, we got 20 grand for putting trees in the area, and that's how because we're always, how do we pay for it? That's the
Yeah,
question.
And
I
you
mean-
can, you can tick up the requirement on landscape requirement when we're developing by the private guy. I mean, it's greener in Midtown, Peachtree in downtown Atlanta sometimes than it is where we are, in our own city. And it's green and growing, that's a landscape requirement.
Yeah, and I think one way that Michael and I will probably see the most benefit is a lot of support from you guys on that, because we frequently get asked when someone comes in, how can I not have to do landscaping? And they want to apply for variances and they want to do the bare minimum when it comes to landscaping. So we really do need the support to tell people like, hey, we're not budging on this. This is the direction that the city is wanting to go. And it's kind of the same for all of this, you know, tell us exactly what department is supposed to own this, who is going to be in charge of installing it, what budget is it supposed to come out of. Like, that's really the direction we need, because that's usually the stopping point is how are we going to fund it?
From the landscaping aspect, we need to have a maintenance requirement on those too. I mean, like, I've watched some of the most beautiful landscaping go in and then it's dead within a year, and that's not benefiting anyone. So, anyway.
It's the first thing to always go is landscaping.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with it's absentee owners. It's people that are buying corporate holds. That just, it doesn't change their bottom line whether there's landscaping or not.
Yeah, I was actually looking at rain harvesting. I don't know if you saw my Facebook post, but I've been looking at rain harvesting to just keep irrigation. Instead of me having to pump city water, I don't know if you know that, city water is expensive. And putting a pump in is also expensive. And I was like, I can hold 5,000 gallons of water off my roof for like $4 grand with a giant tank. I'll take that option. So that kind of spurred on this too. I got really a deep dive into YouTube about rain harvesting. And it's super interesting stuff. So I'd love to see a combination of that too. You know, the little rain barrels that you buy at Home Depot won't capture enough, but you might have someone who says, I'm willing to pay $5 grand if I don't have to have a gigantic stormwater pond that then keeps the irrigation, keeps the plants alive for free, basically, using the rainwater. So maybe it's two birds with one stone.
Mike, I'm sorry, go ahead, ma'am.
I was just gonna say, before we end, I wanna make sure we talk about parking as well, because when we talk about developing of the MLK corridor, that is, a major challenge. Particularly, you know, when we look at the new, parcel that we're acquiring there at the corner of MLK and 15, there's a dire need for parking, but also I'm conflicted because that's really not the highest and best use of a major corner intersection like that. But what are some possible parking options?
So can I make a suggestion, just an observation that I've seen? The cities that have the least amount of parking requirements also have the most amount of residents that live by and the least need for parking. So it sounds like it's counterintuitive, but it's really not.
Cities actually have parking maximums now. They don't want you to put too much parking.
And
But when we look at MLK corridor that doesn't have the infrastructure that the downtown already has for parking 2 or 3 blocks away, we're bringing people there who are coming by car, and many who will walk there may not support the feasibility of a business opening there, so they're gonna be dependent upon some drive traffic.
The city could, if it's contiguous or near contiguous, the city can participate on some of this land we have. You
Well,
know?
and even some of the existing parking lots we've talked about,
Yeah.
with the MLK Rec Center and with the Glenwood Community Center.
I would
The
encourage
Rec Center already
on-street.
doesn't have enough
Yeah.
parking.
Well, That's a
No.
good problem to have.
Yeah, it is a good
I
problem.
think on-street is the first step into that direction. 11th Street, there's been some conversations in St. Andrews, of portions of 11th Street, changing to on-street parking. That could be the same, in the, Glenwood area. And then these side streets, I think that there's a lot of avenue for parallel parking and those kind of things. I think that's kind of how you start with where you've already got.
So what I'm asking for is a plan, that when somebody comes and says, hey, I wanna put this building here, this restaurant, this, shop, that our current requirements, you know, that's a part of the challenge for them. And if we've got a plan like we're talking about for, I think you call it a green infrastructure program, you know, an urban parking, or whatever we wanna call it.
Because if you leave St. Andrews in downtown, you have parking requirements. So we can lessen those to make it not be as bad, like Walmart. Look at how much parking they have versus the store, okay? You can park almost an army in front of the Walmart shopping center. But over there, you don't need that, let's say you don't need that much over there, but the requirement might be there. So if we lessen that requirement, you know, are you gonna fill it up all the time? No, but when it's filled up, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I do want a balance.
Yeah.
Want the walkability. In fact, one of the comments I made at the end of the Dover Cole series of charrettes, and I was looking at walkability on Jenks and walkability on Harrison. I said the only corridor out is the MLK Boulevard, and people are speeding up and down that, and we want to slow that down as well. And so we have to plan for that and incorporate it, and right now our plans don't incorporate that.
I was just gonna ask Michael earlier, I mean, given some of this conversation, I mean, I imagine there's probably 2 or 3 buckets, but, you know, there's probably one bucket with, you know, some pretty easy, you know, almost tap-in code changes we need to make, but there's probably gonna be some that are gonna be a little bit heavier lift. Have you
Yeah.
kind of penciled some of that out in your mind yet?
Yeah, there are some changes to the code that I think we could get after pretty quickly. And one of those are the allowable paving surfaces. You know, this sheet that the mayor provided gives a lot of different examples, and that, some of which we can add into our code, because we only have 3 approved paving surfaces: concrete, asphalt, and then an approved paver system. And that's it. If you're not doing one of those, sorry, you can't. So I think increasing the list of approved paving systems is probably one of the easier lifts, and one of the things we can do right now. And then another one would be to add into our code the ability for people to do bioswales and planters, because again, right now our code is geared towards making people do a pond, your conventional stormwater pond. And I think adding in these other options into our code will trigger some people to actually look at doing them.
What about lot splitting? Because you're allowed to split it once in the code.
Right.
And once you get to 3, it's a subdivision. But what we're talking about anyway, you're gonna need stormwater anyway on a commercial site.
Yeah,
But do we need to change the ability to split that lot
we could.
more than once? Or it has to be a certain, because then you're still working around the square footage.
That could be another,
And only on the commercial stuff.
Could we
Yeah.
say under 1 acre, you can split as many times as you can legally make your, to meet, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, we have a minimum lot size.
Sure.
You know, that's there. And others say,
Yeah,
but
we
if it's
could do-
under an acre, we don't care if you split it 10
Well,
times.
currently, if it's platted, and let's say it has 3 lots, you don't have to do any lot split. You can go build on those.
right.
If you're gonna create it, it has to meet the frontage requirement or the square footage requirement, or is that both?
Frontage and both.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then, because you're creating it, you're running under a different set of rules. So you're right, yes, you can, but if it's, let's say you got a piece of property on MLK that's 4 platted lots, you don't need to do anything, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, and under the code, because it was platted before a certain date.
But what I guess I was saying, to Stacy's point, you don't have to deal with FDP unless you're over an acre. If we said acre, you can split as many times as you want to.
And that's what I'm
Like,
saying. If it's
This could be
big,
handled at a staff level versus having to have, you know, 1,000 plats.
right, if it's a big
and things
piece, but
like
you
that.
divide it into 4.
You guys
now
are
you're
signing
under
the
four- now
plats
you're under
anyway,
an
so I
acre.
mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
You like that? Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I definitely think there's some things that we can probably get after in the next month or 2, and add into our code to help get some of this going.
That's a planning board meeting and our
It
us,
would-
right?
Because it's a change to the land development code, it would have to go to the planning board and then come to y'all.
Yeah. I mean, what we're doing is the same thing they did when they created the city in you know, the early 1900s, when they were like, oh, yeah, you know what, you can share a wall with somebody else. No, that's okay. That's not a fire safety issue. You know, like
Give
you
me
can
concrete,
do that.
not-
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the same difference. We're just trying to recreate, in a lot of ways, what we lost. So,
Right.
If you had 3 code changes, do they have to be individual or can they all be at one time?
We can do them all at the same time. Yeah.
Purposes of time there, Mayor.
Do we currently have something called a green infrastructure program? So,
Sounds good.
yeah, yeah.
No, we don't have anything right now. I mean, we had a previous workshop 6-ish months ago where I presented essentially all of these items to y'all then.
I knew it sounded familiar.
Yeah, I had prettier pictures than Dover
Yeah.
Coal, I will say. But I think one of the things that is making these slow moves away from the way things have always been done. Those mounded landscape islands, like I talked about, those could actually treat a significant amount of stormwater in a parking lot. And we already have them. Every 15 spaces, you're required to have a landscaped island. So you still can put a tree in it, but then you
Just go in rather than
Yep,
up.
exactly. And then it's still curbed. People aren't supposed to be walking in it. It's, no one will ever know the difference except for when it rains. That's treatment volume instead of a pond. And then you can add some plants in them, make them like a rain garden. We can have these areas in parking lots where we may have more of a rain garden effect than a landscape island. We may have more, it may encourage more landscaped areas if we tell them, hey, if you grade this properly, this could flood. If you have some drought tolerant but water loving plants, you can have this actually be your stormwater treatment. So if we just can, we have many development meetings up front on pre-application meetings, and we can just tell people, hey, this is going to be strongly favored by the commission. They're gonna wanna see this, and maybe we de-incentivize ponds.
Yes,
Right.
please.
I think that's where it's headed across the board. I think you're gonna start to see more pressure to not have a pond than you already have a pond, because after a couple of years, they're useless anyway because they don't get maintained.
Well, think about the amount of land it takes up on your site too.
A small
It-
parcel.
make money
you
on
You
can't-
kill
stormwater
it.
ponds.
You do not make, that's right, you don't know, they cost you, just all day long, yeah.
So moving forward, before we close this, can we reach out to Sankofa Group to tell them we have some tools that they might be apply to their own project to keep it moving forward?
Yeah, I will say I did, in an early meeting, very early meeting with them, I talked to them about pervious pavement, tree pits, and talked to them about trying to harvest water in their tree pits instead of having to push them all downstream. So I'll just touch base again, make sure that they're trying to utilize every single one of those methods, maybe show them some of the things that we've done in some of our parking lots that, that they could maybe use in theirs.
Is that with them or the engineer?
Their engineer.
Okay. Okay.
And trying to use the park more.
Yes, and yeah, I've talked to them at length. I think the very first sit-down meeting we ever had with them, I mentioned that park to use for stormwater.
Cool. Anything else? Any other discussion?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I don't have a gavel to gavel the meeting. I need a gong. Wah, wah, wah. Thanks for everything. Thanks for all the work.
Thank you.
Thanks.